Welcome back to the Pilot's Lounge podcast. On today's episode, we are joined by my friend and colleague, Mike, aka Snak Pak, who's an instructor pilot currently down at Fort Rucker, who's going to share with us his story as well as talk a little bit about APART prep and the things that are currently coming out of Fort Rucker, aka the future Fort Novacell, and shares with us some pretty cool stories. It's one you're not going to want to miss. But before we dive into that, we have two seasonal things going on at Brotalion.com right now, one of which being the Trick or Treat MH6 Little Bird swag that is available right now through Halloween, as well as our Moons Out Goons Out giveaway. So with the Moons Out Goons Out giveaway, send your pics or videos to our email or via DM to the Instagram page, and you'll get a 20% off code to Brotalion.com. The contents that sent in will be posted from Friday through Halloween. That has the most likes on it will get a limited item not available on our store. We're not going to share what that is, but it's going to be pretty freaking awesome. So be sure to check that out at our Instagram at Brotalion or www.brotalion.com. From wherever you're listening, sit back, grab your cup of coffee, and thanks again for joining us on the Pilot's Lounge.
What's going on, Brotalion? This is John Gray, host of the Hangar Z podcast. We love the Pilot's Lounge podcast and know you do as well. Hey, when you're done here, come check out the Hangar Z podcast. We're the first and only podcast promoting the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. You can find us at hangarzpodcast.com or anywhere where you listen to podcasts.
As we're diving into today's episode, we do want to extend a brief apology for our host side audio quality at the beginning of the episode from some technical difficulties that we had. However, our guest Mike still sounds amazing. And at the end of the episode, be sure to hang out. We talk a little bit about Mike's YouTube channel as well as the Brotalion YouTube channel and how he got his name, Snak Pak. Welcome back to the Pilot's Lounge. On today's episode, we are joined by my dear friend Mike, aka Snak Pak Omer, who served alongside him for a couple years in 101 prior to him going down to Fort Rucker, where he currently serves as an instructor pilot, teaching our next generation of Black Hawk pilots in the schoolhouse. Mike, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. Real excited to be here.
Yeah, so to kind of give people some background on the extent that Mike and I know each other, we lived together in Europe. It's actually where I met him. We lived in the same apartment. To go into Mike's variety of skills, which I'm sure we will throughout the episode here and there, probably the biggest thing that I can say I learned and that I came to know is that Mike is the most consummate, like, jack of all trades, quite literally, from being a chef, a musician, a comedian. I would have to throw that one in there.
Definitely not a comedian. Kind of you to say, though.
A fantastic pilot, but overall just a really good dude. I can't say enough good things. But so when I wanted to, I talked with the other guys, and unfortunately they couldn't be on. I talked with them. I was like, I feel like we're moving into winter, and for whatever reason, I feel like from fall to spring, it just it's always packed with APARTs. For some reason, summer doesn't really seem like it has that many, at least in the company I'm in right now. But then we look at the winter months, and it just seems like there is just a lot. And it could just be specifically our ATP. But nonetheless, it kind of drove the idea of like, hey, let's talk APART prep. And honestly, I thought back to kind of your PC ride prep, back in Europe, and watching you how methodical you are about the way you go about things. And I was like, man, if I could ask anybody about how to best cut the whole pie into pieces to make it easier to swallow, it probably would be Mike. So yeah, here we are. Instructor pilot himself down there teaching.
It's funny you bring up PC check rides, because I don't remember mine going very smoothly or methodical at all, but to each their own.
No, but the studying process, I remember very specifically like how you went about it. And I thought that was smart. But then I also, outside of just the PC ride process that went on, I thought back to what you said one day in the office about how whenever, crew chiefs or your PI and the crew chiefs in the back start talking about random shit in the aircraft, how you just start calling out numbers from your performance page, or your CDs, PDs, like TGT, MP, and I was like, well, that's about the most OCD type of thing that I could think of or see. But
well, you got to bring everybody back to the flight. It's, especially on those long cross countries where it's clear blue 22, and people start putting jars of peanuts up on the center console and start eating them while they're flying. It's like, okay, hey everybody, let's we're at 100 knots, 1,000 feet, everything's looking good. Let's do a level off check or something, just recage everybody, start telling silly stories, and after a while just
but in my
move
head,
out of the comfort zone.
But in my head, every single time I think of that, I think of like nothing outside of 100%, 478, like just starting to call out the numbers in that like in a robotic fashion. But nonetheless, that kind of led me to think about that. And honestly, more so than just that, what really was like, I was like, man, we've got to get Mike on here, was obviously you've been sharing a lot more of your YouTube videos onto Facebook, which is originally how I've came across them a while back. But, I started watching some of your YouTube videos that you're making, and they make a lot of sense. And it's obvious, because I haven't seen you other than, a little bit last year when you were down there right after you moved. But it's very obvious that you are like fully in on instructor mode and that you are committed to that. And so I was like, cool, this is going to be great. But before we dive into that, we're going to get warmed up a little bit. So you of all people understand what table talk is. And we like to do our own version of table talk. Typically we have around 2 to 3 of us that are asking questions, but I'm just going to fire off with a couple easy ones today.
Cool.
Yeah. And these are not anything related to the normal table talk that you would think of. These literally can come from anywhere. So, but one that we always ask is, what is your favorite dive bar you have been to, including where it's at and why?
Ooh, good question. I'd probably have to go with Layla's in Nashville. Probably because when I was still dating my wife, this was like shortly before we got engaged, I was still living in Florida, and she had moved to Tennessee. She dumped me and moved to Tennessee. I came up to visit her, and she was living in Nashville. We went to Layla's, and there's an awesome rockabilly band playing there called Hillbilly Casino, and they're just amazing. So we really enjoyed going to see them. But having moved there, and I was stationed at Campbell twice, so I spent about 5 years there, and we would very frequently, whenever we could, get down to Nashville. That's where we would always spend our time and go see that band. And it's not the cleanest place, it's not the cleanest bar you ever been to, but it's pretty cool. It's like got a 2-story. It's got a little loft upstairs, and
where in Nashville is that at?
It's on the Strip. It's on the Broadway Strip.
It's
like
Broadway?
Right in the middle.
Okay. It's one of those days. Okay, so you have to be mentally prepared if you're going in.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have the customary the bridal parties or whatever, the bachelorette parties, and all that, and driving by. But yeah, I think one time somebody on the dance floor just totally blacked out, and I had to call an ambulance in, and it just killed the whole vibe. And the band,
I do feel like that's somewhat a regular occurrence. Yeah, I do try my best to avoid Broadway. I've actually only been on Broadway maybe 2 or 3 times. I'm not a fan of Broadway, but I will have to check out Layla's. I've actually not. I've not been.
It's one of the only places. Well, it's one of the only places that has what I would call good country music. It's not really country; it's like rockabilly. But they got a lot of the pop country in a lot of those bars. But that place usually has some good stuff going on. So
cool. I'll have to check it out. If it's Mike Ulmer approved with music, then it says something. And we'll get into a little bit about your background. I'm not even going to dive into that quite yet. Okay, cool. So this actually will bleed. It'll bleed a little bit into that. Before I know, and we're going to dive into a little bit about your story before we go into our main topics. But of all the instruments you have played, what is your favorite and why?
I'm a big fan of the keyboard. It's kind of the simplest way to get started, but probably the hardest to master because you can just do so much with it. But it's kind of like the full orchestra all at the same time, so you can pretty much play any song you've ever heard, whether it was written for a different instrument or not. You can pretty much play anything on there if you acquire the skill, which I am very shy, very early in my journey of learning. So, but it's always a challenge, but easy to pick up.
You say that, but on your YouTube channel, like 4 years ago, you had some pretty decent music lessons. I opened one of those videos up because I was like, aviation. Oh, there's a keyboard. Open it up. And I was like, okay, closing that. I don't know what he's talking about. I was like, when I go read tabs on guitar and not mess with reading music. But no, that's awesome.
Easier approach.
I could see that. And too, especially nowadays, if you ever wanted to go back into that realm and make music I know you still make music, but expand on that. It seems like the electronic music world is just booming right now, and everybody has a little keyboard and mixers and all of that. So,
yeah,
kind of expanding off of that. If you don't mind taking a moment and sharing how you got into aviation and what brought you to where you are now, because I think, honestly, of everybody I've met in the last 10 years, you probably have one of the most interesting pathways and stories of how you got to where you are now. And I think it's worth sharing because the people who listen to this, some are military, some are not, some want to join the military, some are enlisted. We have all types of people, and we do get questions about like, oh, hey, I don't have any background in aviation. I'm like, oh, hey, well, here's a great example,
Yeah, sure. So, believe it or not, I wanted to be a pilot when I was a little kid. Just 5-6 years old. I had little books with like all the different planes in there, and I could identify like an F-16 from an F-14. That was really what I wanted to do, is go be like a fighter jet pilot when I was little. But I have an older brother, and he was a really good artist, and turns out he went to college for like a tech school for like computer animation, and his trying to get into that business was kind of a struggle for him. And long story short, he ended up becoming a Black Hawk pilot in the Army. He went street to seat. And at this point, I was starting to get into music, and I was like, wow, way to steal my thunder there, And I was like, well, there's no way I can, do what he did and, be like the second one to do it. So I went off and I actually went to music school. I got a degree in jazz studies from University of North Florida. And I spent a lot of time in Jacksonville, just playing local gigs around town and teaching a lot. So that's where I started teaching, was like one-on-one music lessons, and I actually really enjoyed that. The money's not really there for it, but at the time it was fun. It was a fun place to get started, I guess, right out of college. Just doing teaching and playing gigs around town, playing for churches and stuff like that. And then I met my future wife, and one thing led to another. We dated for a little while. She ended up moving to Nashville for numerous reasons, and we kind of like split up. And then it was like, oh man, maybe this was a bad idea. And we would visit each other frequently. And I was getting sick of Jacksonville, and I kind of needed a change. So I was like, well, what better place for a musician than Nashville? And I moved to Nashville, and I had like 10,000 music lessons I had taught under my belt. I'm like, man, I got a really good resume. This is going to be great. Everybody wants to be a musician in Nashville. Like it's going to be so easy. And I get there, and I was like at the bottom of this long list of people waiting to get a job at a music studio to teach or whatever, just to start out. And, everybody's trying to work their way into the gig scene there. So that's when I started looking at the finances, and I was like, this is not going too well. And I actually dropped a street to seat packet. That was in 2012, 2013. And they were kind of shaving people off at the time. It wasn't the best time to apply, or maybe my packet just sucked. I don't know what it was, but I didn't make it. So
between the sequester, because they were combining boards, because that was when I originally came in. They were combining boards and stuff. It was a rough time, that's for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, so I start looking at, I was talking to the recruiter, And he's like, well, I can get you in enlisted. You know, you want to be an aircraft mechanic, or you want to, I can probably get you in there. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, is there, and then I found out, hey, there's like an Army band. And I was like, well, what do they do? And so I started looking into that, and I found out that they have like a jazz band and a rock band. And I was like, hey, that sounds like a pretty cool way to serve your country, right? And what do I have to do? I just auditioned. And I got accepted. So I went to basic training, and then I went to the Army Music School in Little Creek, Virginia. And so I played primarily trumpet in college, actually. But I auditioned on piano because I didn't want to be in their marching band. I was like, that's the last thing I want to do is walk around in a marching band, right? I want to be in the jazz band and go play at all the Army balls and stuff. And so I get to the AIT, and they're like, oh, you play keyboard? Here's a bass drum. Carry this around, and you're in the marching band. And I was like, great. This is awful. And so, my time in the Army band was fun. I had some really cool experiences and met some great people, but ultimately it just wasn't for me. And after about a year of that, I was ready to try something else. And so I dropped another packet, and I got picked up that time and went to flight school. And then out of flight school, I was really lucky to I got stationed at Fort Campbell, and I was really lucky to get there when they did, because they were in Afghanistan. And so I got to catch the back half of that deployment, which was great for starting out. I mean, because I got to progress. I did the Lima transition, and I got to progress really quick and get some little bit of combat experience. I mean, we were just kind of doing, air movement routes around the Kabul area. So nothing crazy, but at least I got to fly in a combat zone and kind of see what that looked like. And, and then came back and just spent a few more years at Campbell, did the Europe rotation where you and I met. And, JRTC, 3 JMRC rotations, all that stuff. I got really good, as I'm sure you can sympathize, I got really good at setting up tents.
Yeah. CBR 69.
What was that?
I said all CBR 69. Our combined resolve 69.
Yeah. Combined resolve 69. Right. So, and then, it was time to PCS. And, long story short, they were like, hey, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And I definitely want to track and route, and got really lucky to get down here to Fort Rucker, and they sent me to IPC and then sent me right out on the flight line. I've just been teaching here ever since, it was a crazy transition, but after I got my groove set up here, it's been a lot of fun.
Now, how, for anybody who might be listening, I know a lot of people, and I obviously could talk to the Mike to Lima aspect, but really for the Lima to Mike, and I say this particularly because I know, well, and we can talk the Mike to Lima as well, because I'm really nobody now going through, if they're going to a Lima unit, chances are, if they're not going to a Lima unit now, then they have very limited time to even be able to ever have that opportunity before the Lima is going to go away, right? But
yeah,
do you mind talking a little bit about your experience, leaving flight schools, spending pretty much your career in Limas so far, and then jumping right back into the Mike in a, like, hey, you've got to figure this out because you're about to teach our next generation of people in the Mike, some of the things that you had a hard time with first not.
Well, out of flight school, I only did Mikes in flight school. So then coming to over the 101st and doing Limas, it was definitely an experience. I was hanging on to the stabilator the whole time, for pretty much the whole time I was there, and several months after the fact. That
fluid.
Yeah, that and many other things. The GPS gets everybody, but honestly, it had been, with PCS leave and then deployment, like getting out there, taking all the time, and then finally getting in the air. Like by the time I got up in the Lima, I couldn't even land the thing. Now granted, my first flight was like night unaided, I think. I can't remember, but it was not doing good at first, so definitely a lot of rust to kick off, and then a lot of, learning the sys and all that stuff. But, it was good though, because I think, and especially what I've learned as an instructor, is the more reps you get, the quicker you're going to pick it up. So maybe not necessarily more time in one day, but the more consecutive days of flying is really beneficial. So being in a combat zone where flight hours are unlimited it was really easy for me to at least get going, so it didn't take, nearly as long as I thought to get up RL1. And then coming back over to the mic side, I was fortunate because in IPC they gave me an instructor who kind of specialized in that, in the Lima to mic transition, so I was already qualified in the mic, but it'd been years, so when I got down here, I went and did the sim operators course, which was fortunately like a half an hour, and they're like, great, you can come anytime you want. And I spent a lot of time in the simulator sitting there with the Dash 10 and just trying to remember how everything works.
Right.
So
yeah, and I had, obviously, I had the opposing story of spending, I did Limas in flight school, but then I did the mic course, and then I spent 5 years in mics, and then came to you guys over in Europe, and it was almost the opposite. Granted, our flight time was not unlimited in Europe, but it was kind of trial by fire. Like when I got up, they're like, "Hey, cool, you're a Lima PC, and it's instruments in Europe in the winter." And I'm like, "Super cool. Guess we're gonna figure this out, and we're gonna be okay." But again, to your point, no different to me. I spent a long time, but then you come back to Lima, and you do have that. It's primacy. I learned it at one point, and it'll come back. And, we have some of our peers are literally going through the same thing down at Rucker right now. I'm sure you've talked to some of them. And, I think you figure it out. So if you're somebody who's out there and you found out you're going to a CAC unit, or you're going to go fly Limas, or you're coming back to a guard unit who has the Limas, or vice versa, maybe you've been a career Lima person going to mics, it's really not that bad. At the end of the day, a Black Hawk's a Black Hawk, and the fundamentals are the fundamentals. It's just the systems that, are a little different. But no, so kind of bleeding off of that question, you had a really cool YouTube video, and we're going to dive a little bit into your YouTube channel before we dive into the A-part stuff.
Sure.
The YouTube review of the company, and it was for Flight Simulator 10, right?
What you talking about? About the Black Hawk?
The Black Hawk review that you did. That was like a Franken mic that like had like some Lima stuff, mic stuff. I was watching that and I was like, this is super interesting, but you're going through it.
So in all defense to the guy who's developing that is a work in progress, and he's not got much to go off of. And I had contacted him being like, hey, I can try to help you out. And he's like, what I really need is an operator's manual and all this. And I was like, I can't really give you that. Man.
Sorry,
it's not for public use. It says right on the cover, like it's,
Abu over in Kabul is trying to figure out how to start this Black Hawk that got left there last August. And he really needs the Dash 10.
It's funny because like there's a guy who made a Lima for DCS, and this thing is like, I can't believe the detail this dude put into it. I mean, it's like I'm sitting there with a VR headset inside this cockpit, and I'm like, okay, is this real life? Or like, I'm like that that kid who got the whatever, the anesthetic, it's just real life. It's like you're getting getting really close to not being able to tell the difference, and
right.
But yeah, so I think that the dude who made the mic for Microsoft Flight Simulator, he's working on it, and he's doing a lot of work. They actually made a H135 that you can pay for. That's like super legit. I mean, it's really pretty much the same. It's a real thing. All the switches work and all the dials and gizmos work like they're supposed to. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I never got to fly one of those, but I'm sure there's a Bell 406 or 207. I'm sure that those exist out there that are similar in terms of likeness to the real thing.
Yeah, probably.
Now, so kind of diving into, because it seemed like I was looking at your channel. It seemed like you took a little bit of a break. What made you want to get back into creating YouTube videos?
Well, now that I get to call myself an IP, I thought, hey, you know what? I really, you saw I had some like little music instruction videos that I started doing a long time ago, and I just kind of like let it go. But this new generation of flight simulators that people can get on their computer, it's kind of like what you were talking about earlier, where people have like these electronic instruments and they're getting on their MacBooks and making like pro quality recordings. The same kind of thing is happening in the realm of flight simulation. And it's got to the point now where first of all, I spent a irresponsible amount of money on a PC setup and like flight controls and this like VR headset and all this stuff. Cause I was playing this thing on my little MacBook, and it was putting along on like super low detail and all that. Yeah. And so finally, I had saved up a little money. I'm like, all right, I can't wait anymore. And I bought this thing, and it's just like mind boggling, what these simulators are capable of generating now. Microsoft Flight Simulator has live weather, so you can pair up an app like ForeFlight to Microsoft Flight Simulator, and it's basically got the entire world modeled in 3D using satellite imagery and artificial intelligence. It's like these technologies are staggering nowadays, and you can pair it up with your ForeFlight. So ForeFlight thinks you're really flying, and so what the indications you're getting on ForeFlight or what's actually happening in the simulator in the real world. You can go to any airport, fly in any terrain, and it's all like remarkably lifelike, And I thought, man, if I can, this is a really cool format. If I could use, some of my skills as an instructor and, combine it with this amazing technology, hopefully I can make, some cool videos that people might be interested in. So I'm just getting started and still working on formatting and camera angles and production quality and all that. But I've had a good positive response from the people who have seen them. So they're, some people are interested. A lot of them are simmers. Some of them are pilots who are just getting started, or people who want to be pilots, so that's really the target audience for people. People are getting,
but I think it offers a unique experience, specifically, not just for you, but for anybody who is in a teaching role. So, and relating it to Army aviation, I think it offers a lot of opportunity to pick up, basic things like teaching, a lot of things that people don't think that they would pick up from something like a YouTube video or something like a podcast or whatever type of media.
Yeah.
But especially for your PCs or for your junior CFIs or whoever out there, I think it's good to watch those kind of things or watch people teaching, whether it's a sim or whether it's not, because you can pick up different techniques of teaching itself. And I think it's a cool tool that you're using as an IP to be able to build your teaching skill just in a different media, So
yeah, sure.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully some people can get something out of that. For instructors, I'm a fairly junior IP, so I've got some techniques that I've kind of developed over the past year or so. But yeah, MOI is definitely an art, and especially while you're flying, so you'll see me in, if you watch some of my videos, you'll see me flying, and I'm, messing with my ForeFlight, trying to talk about, a class of airspace and how all that works. And then, I look up and I'm in like a 20-degree nosedive with a banking, I'm like, oh man, let me fix this real quick, and hopefully
well, the flight simulator does tend to be more finicky than the actual aircraft. I will say that.
Well, and plus my aircraft is totally coupleable, which is really nice when I need to, MOI something, but
yeah, that's true. But, you did bring up a good point, in that you said, you're a junior IP, but I think that a big thing that we often, we talk about it, I'll say amongst our group of people, because we're probably, some of the last group of people that saw what we would call the old school IPs that were around really before the whole, what they call the defrag, the hard drive phase came in. We were pretty much the last group that saw those truly old school IPs before they all are now at the staff levels and not really at the company level, truly like immediately affecting us. So to me, because we could go find some, W4 or W5 who's been in for 20 plus years, but the way that they go about prepping for things is going to be significantly different from somebody who's gone through, the most recent course of instruction and knows kind of the way things are going, especially with APARTs, because an APART today is nothing at all like an APART was in 2015 or 2016 or 17 even. Like they're just totally changing, and so I think you offer a unique perspective, given all the things that you do in your own preparations and in your own development. I think you could offer unique perspective to junior pilots on how to tackle this whole thing which is their A part, whether it's their first A part, second A part, or maybe somebody is just really shitty at trying to figure out how to study or how to tackle, especially now when we add in like the AMS ACAT and all this extra information that people are now responsible to know. How do how do we tackle that? How do we go about, where do we start? Where do we try to go?
Well, it's a great question. And I mean, there's a pretty simple answer, and it's just that, you just have to take this job seriously and always be trying to get better and always be studying and always looking at new things. However, I think there's a few things that have stuck out to me when I'm giving evaluations. Actually, just recently I did my A part a couple months ago, so I can kind of expound on like some of the things I did and some of the things I see. So if you think about it from an IP perspective, there's always 4 phases to the evaluation, right? There's the little introduction, and then there's the oral eval, then there's the flight, and then there's the debrief, right? So the little introductory part is like supposed to explain, how the eval is going to work. And, you might start off with, "Oh, hello, I'm Mr. Ulmer," and if you're in a unit, you know the IP, you work with them every day. Right. Yeah. So it's like, it kind of loses its meaning. Right. But at least they're supposed to be explaining to you, like the general flow of how it's going to go. But that brings about a really good time to set a first impression of how that eval is going to go. So one of the things I learned that was different when I was doing my private pilot license for fixed wing was my CFI was like, "Okay, Mike," he was getting me ready to meet with the DP and all that. He's like, "Mike, you need to start putting a binder together." I was like, "Okay, what goes in the binder?" He's like, "Well, put a copy of your driver's license and your pilot certificate, and you want to get like the maintenance logs and all that for your airplane, and put all that in there, and your what was that little form, the little IACRA,
Yep, your IACRA.
Yeah, IACRA form. I got all, and I'm like, putting them in plastic inserts, and so I go on YouTube. I love YouTube. I go on YouTube, and there's people who have made these like ridiculous binders, right? They got like VFR sectional cut up, put in their little binder of their little flight route, and they got like all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And it struck me as odd because as a military pilot for the past several years, like, I don't really know anybody who goes to those lengths to prepare for their A part. Like, sure, they're studying and they'll come in with like a TDH card and a PPC or whatever, but like, this, I guess it's just the level of preparedness people put into a civilian pilot's license. Maybe it's different because they have to pay for it. I don't know what the difference, I don't know what causes it, but I've noticed that a lot of people, like in flight school, maybe they just don't know, they haven't, it's their first series of check rides, they've ever taken. They're still in flight school, but the level of preparedness and showing up, making that good first impression, like, "Hey, I'm super prepared for this check ride," way higher on the civilian side. So in my check ride that I did, my A part I did a couple months ago, I was kind of bored, and I'm a nerd. I like to mess around with computer products and stuff, and so I was supposed to do a IFR flight, and we were going to go to Andalusia, do some pattern work at night, after goggle dark, and then he had me do a TAC route out to one of the RTs, and then back home. So I was like, okay, cool. I went ahead and did my IFR route in amps, even though it's totally acceptable to do it in 4-flight or whatever. I just wanted to have like a nice looking TDH card, and it has my required fuel on there. I went through, so I got my TDH card. I had a separate slide that had all my fuel planning using the RERA format,
Right.
Yeah. I have all my alternate planning already done, right? So I don't even know what the weather is going to be, but here's what I need to, file to this destination without needing an alternate. Here's the VFR exception rule. This is the minimum altitude, my minimum en route altitude I need, and minimum cloud ceiling that I need, the minimum cloud ceiling that I can legally do my VFR exception rule. I got all this stuff worked out. I started doing a TAC route, and I made, a cool MB Tiles map with my route on there, all the dog houses, a little box with all the RT info, super streamlined products, right? I got my TDH for my TAC route. Okay, so this is super nerdy, but I made a LZ diagram, and I had like a offset Google Earth image of the
Right.
RT,
Yeah.
but I'm coming in at night, so I'm like, well, this is a daytime. So I found a NVG photo filter online, and I ran it through. So this sounds crazy, right? But I did that, and I messed with the color settings because it was green, so I had to make it like white phos. And it was it's kind of ridiculous what I did, right? It was like way too much, and it was like, it got to the point where it was a little silly. But the point is, I put all this stuff, I wrapped it up in a nice little digital packet with little hyperlink buttons and everything. And so when I show up to the table, this is my first impression, right? It's like, maybe I'm not going to crush the oral eval, maybe I will, maybe I'll do great. We don't know. But one thing's not in question, and that is that I am in any way unprepared for this flight, right? So that's the first impression. I sat down, I've got like a sweet mission packet with a bunch of cool stuff already worked out. And I put in the time to prepare for the eval. So I think that,
right. Yeah. You're just showing your evaluator that you actually care, that they are taking their time to, and you're investing in your own learning.
Yeah. And that's first impressions. Right. And if anything, if I've learned anything, I've had some good flights and I've had some bad flights. And I'm sure you can totally relate that the more you prepare at the table, the better your flight's going to go. Right. And so
100%.
Yeah. And that's where I think a lot of that check ride-itis, I think it comes from a combination of not being as prepared as you think you should be, and like fear of the unknown, right? So for me, like on my PC check ride, I got super check ride-itis. So I was like, what's going to happen? Are they going to, are they going to kill the engines in the middle while I'm trying to do something? And what's going to happen? I just got super nervous, but.
Now just boost off ILS. It'll be fine.
Yeah, boost off ILS in the Ramstein. But yeah, I think a lot of like especially flight school kids, I think they get that check ride-itis because they're like, man, I don't know if I studied enough or whatever, and like they show up and I can tell they're nervous. I got to try to like take the edge off for them, try to help them out. But those first impressions are really going to matter, and if you show up with the only thing you really do before the oral eval is show up with like some good products, like, hey, I got all this stuff sorted out already, and the hope is to try to maybe not disarm, but just try to put out that vibe that like, hey, no matter what happens today, you can't say I'm not prepared. You can't say I didn't try it like my very best to do this well. So when it comes to oral eval stuff, I mean, like I said, there's no easy answer. You just gotta keep up. I mean, you open up that open up your ATM and you look at that ACAT and it's intimidating. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff. Then add the other ACAT, the AMS ACAT once they show up to their unit. It's a lot of information, and that's the big. We've had people coming to us like, how am I supposed to have time to look at both of these in prep for an A part? It's a lot of information.
Oh yeah. And especially when each regulation or each publication in the ACAT, it can be hundreds of pages, and it's like, what do I study? So I would say that there's a few things. First of all, do not ever show up to an eval and not be able to spit off underlying EP steps like instantly. You'd be surprised. I've had, just in the past couple of months, I've had a couple people show up to a contact check ride who, even though we only have 20% of the EP underlying steps to memorize now after the FRC came out, people are showing up. I don't know if it's just nerves or whatever. I generally am a pretty, relaxed dude, and I try not to be like too intimidating, but yeah, people rolling up and they're like, they're forgetting simple stuff like that. That's like non-negotiable. So start there. Also, when you're looking at what should I be studying, you kind of have to sift through all the gunk and figure out what's relevant, right? So, if they're going to ask you aeromed questions, for instance, right? Nobody's going to ask you about like the parts and pieces of your respiratory system, right? Like nobody ever talks about that. It's in the .93.
That's true. It is in the .93.
It's in the .93. They go into fine detail about your respiratory system and different types of, in what did the official term for inhalation and exhalation? I can't even remember because I don't care.
I don't know. It's changed.
Yeah.
It's changed twice.
Yeah. And nobody's going to ask you about that. They're going to ask you about hypoxia. They're going to ask you about stress and fatigue and all this, all the same stuff, so, but make sure you understand the basics of that, because it does affect us. It is important to know, simpler stuff like that. So with oral evals, you just got to sift through all the gunk. You got to try your best to study what's relevant and make sure you know the important stuff right off the bat. A lot of people I've noticed don't really know how to study. I've had people come in, people come in with, bachelor's degrees, and they're like, I never had to study in college. My major, I never studied anything, and they don't have a good study habit. So, what I would always do is just,
lucky for them, I certainly did.
Yeah. Yeah. What I would always do is just break stuff up. And maybe this is something that came from my degree, which didn't require a lot of studying, but it required a lot of practice. And, I'd have to, put together dozens of pages of music and be able to get them ready to perform within, a couple of days. And,
right.
My method was I would attack my weaknesses, right? It's like, okay, these first 2 pages are easy. I don't even need to look at that right now. Let me focus on the hard parts first. Focus on the stuff. If you suck at systems, dive into systems, right? Dive way in, start with the DEC, right? Start with the electrical system, attack your weaknesses and start getting good at that stuff now. Because once you get over those humps, the rest of the stuff is going to seem easier, And if it's,
do they still do the Flightline supplement?
Say that again.
Do they still do the Flightline supplement?
Yeah. We still use the same Flightline supplement. Not much has changed. So yeah, that's a really good way to, hone in on specifically what you need to know at like a rote memorization level.
Right.
It's not so much of a help getting all the way up to the correlation level. You really need to kind of dive in a little more detail than that. And we hope that people get there before they leave flight school, but it's a condensed course. So it takes a while,
So, and to kind of expand on that. So pretty much I would say most people, if they're already in the Army or are in the flight school pipeline, they probably know what the Flightline supplement is in some way, shape, or form. But kind of what we're getting at for any of our listeners who might be either in flight school or just out of flight school, maybe haven't started progression or maybe in progression, is that kind of your baseline knowledge in flight school. Kind of the Flightline supplement is a general outline of what you're expected to know as a flight school student. But I think the problem is that people leave and they still kind of go back to that document because it's their safe space. And now here they are supposed to be, getting ready to be an R01 pilot, and they go into that first A part, or maybe even their second A part. Maybe they got through their first one and just skimmed by, and they were like, yeah, we're going to check you because it was your first one and you're new, but you study.
Yeah.
What would you recommend they do? Like, do you think they should go talk to an IP to try to find out where those important areas are, or what?
Well, sure. I mean, that's our job, essentially. But the Flightline supplement's great, but even in there, there's weird stuff like everybody knows Scalp, right? All the 60 pilots know Scalp,
right?
And that S for streamline. Well, go in the -10 and find where it says that it streamlines, at a low airspeed, right? Tell me where it says that, because it doesn't say that at all, right? What the S should really be like, it slows down at below 40 knots, right? Yeah. It doesn't streamline anything. That's not even in the operator's manual. So I don't know, maybe it's from some other maintenance manual or something I'm just not aware of, but it's
the most I could think. The only place I could even imagine that existing is the .4. And I apologize to all of our non-Army people who are listening to this, and you guys are like thinking you guys are spitting out numbers.
Too much detail.
But again, this is 100%. This episode is really more towards A part prep and trying to help people, because I will say, specific to my unit, we have a lot of junior guys, and you were with me in ACO before I moved to the Med, and the Med is just huge. In our particular unit, we have a lot of junior people who but yet on the other side of that, we don't have enough PCs to always be right there offering as much mentoring as what I wish we could. The company's just too big.
Sure.
We have too many people and everybody's, stressed with arms and everything else going on. And that was brought up recently is, we're like, oh, well, PIs should go have PI study groups that'll help them tackle this. But then you kind of have the blind leading the blind. And we're like, okay, well, now you guys have bad study groups because you're focusing on irrelevant shit. So, it's like, how do we hone that in? And they're like, there's so many areas. I mean, I think now when we add the two ACATs together, there's over 25 subject areas. It's wild.
Yeah. And you're like, nobody knows everything. All right. There's so much stuff in that 100%. ACAT that I probably have just never heard of. And I'm not going to lie to you. Like I sit around with some of these old DACs, some of these dudes who are like an ME and an SP, and they're just like, they have, they've had like 35 years in the game and 10,000 flight hours, and they're talking about stuff that just goes over my head. I'm just honestly just like, it's too much detail. I don't, it's not really going to affect me in any way, but it's super cool that that, and to me, it seems like they do know everything. But at the end of the day, the oral evaluation is not meant to be, a Jeopardy contest or, a super like tightly graded event. It's meant to gauge how much and are you consistently keeping up with this stuff? Are you consistently trying to prepare and trying to get better every day? Right. One 8 part to the next, there should be a significant improvement, and the question should be harder, for as you get, if an IP has a third year pilot, the question should be more intense than, tell me the acronym for the hydromechanical unit. It should be more intense than that. Yeah. How does the DEC interact with the hydromechanical unit when I do this to the collective or whatever, it should be much more on the correlation level, but more so than that, an A part is meant to try to recage you. Right. When I got to IPC and I went out for the first flight with my instructor, he was one of the best pilots I've ever known and ever flown with. He's still here. He's about to retire, but just an incredible guy. The first flight, I realized that I had developed so many bad habits that nobody else was calling me out on. I was a pilot in command. I was flying with other PCs, other PIs, and just doing things that were not really that smart, that just like out of the unit, away from Mother Rucker or Madre Nova Cell, as it's about to be called.
Is it really? They're calling it Fort Nova Cell?
Yeah, it's going to be Fort Nova Cell.
We'll get into the Ruckerisms here soon.
But yeah, there's so many things that I just needed to be recaged on, and that's really the intent for the stands community, is to get everybody back to the standard, right? And try to bring you back to the Fort Rucker ways, because one thing I learned when I got here, the accident rate at Fort Rucker per flight hour is about 25% what it is for the rest of the Army. And I thought about it and I was like, well, we also take on a lot less risk here. We don't do as risky or of missions as everybody else, but at the same time, everybody follows the book here, and that's not. That can be boring at times, but I'll tell you what, it keeps people alive, and it keeps us doing the job correctly.
Yeah, think about the traffic going in and out of the airfields there, just in general. There's too many people. There's a shit ton of people.
Hey, say that again, you cut out.
Yeah, I said, just think about the number of aircraft there alone.
Oh, yeah.
It's just insane. There's so many people flying there all the time.
Yeah. And everybody's a super stickler for the SOP here because we have to be. I remember flying out with people out on the reservation at Campbell, and they're doing a $130 NOE. And I'm like, hey, pretty sure the SOP says we're only supposed to go 100. And they're like, yeah, what are they going to do? Write me a speeding ticket? And that here at Rucker, like, that would not fly. It's like, that's a no-go because
I bet I can name who said that, but we won't. We won't.
Yeah.
Imagine they are TikTok famous if I had to guess.
Yeah, possibly. But yeah.
But
go ahead.
I think something that was interesting that was brought up the other day is we had an untracked PC who was a former 15 Tango, which for those of you who don't know what a 15 Tango is, it's an aircraft mechanic. So he spent a good portion of his it's UH-60 Blackhawk mechanics specifically, or aircraft repairman, whatever their official term is. But he brought up a good point, because he is very much like he kind of reminds me of you. I don't know, and I won't say his name on here just to keep his privacy, but he brought up the point when we had this big conversation about what the PIs brought up, and like there's just so much information, and how do we wrap our heads around this, because we noticed that some of them were falling behind, and we took that as like, oh man, we are failing them. Like where are we failing them? How can we help them? Is there information that we can try to drive in their direction? How do we help them feel better prepared? Because if a junior pilot is not prepared, yes, there is a level of responsibility that they have to study, but then there's a level of responsibility we have to, kind of like what you said, let them know what's important. So if you're a PI out there, kind of my thought process on that is like, there's two ways you can go about it. One, you need to be studying, or there's two ways you should go about it, kind of parallel to one another. You should be studying, but then you should be linking in. And no, while you don't necessarily, kind of based off what you said, I don't necessarily think they need to sit down or like be led hand in hand by a PC or a tracked guy or an IP or whatever. But the questions have to be asked, because I think if those questions aren't asked at all to people like the stand shop or to their smart PCs who are those go-to guys, then when they go to that prep phase, like you're talking about, and they don't even know what to be prepared for.
Right.
They don't know about the binder. They don't know about the pack kit. They don't know how to look good when they go sit down if they don't get that mentorship. But, anyway, back to my point, he brought up, he has a lot of experience in the Army, but he said the same thing, because he has been through years of A parts now, both as a maintainer and as a pilot. And he brought up, he's like, hey, look, day one of your A part period, you should be ready to take your eval. It's not you have 90 days to prepare for your A part. It's, 2 months prior to your birth month, you can be sat down and evaluated, and that is your A part. And he said, so his technique that he was talking about, he's like, hey, look, each day, he's like, I count the number of subject areas in the ACATs, and I count backwards. And each day leading up to the first day, I do a subject area, and then I restart that list once I'm in my A part period until I go and do it. And I was like, man, that's actually a really smart idea. Yeah. And he's like, it's not a deep dive. It's just a quick refresher. And I was like, man, that's pretty interesting. Cause I'm the same way as a lot of people. I suck at studying. And it's not because I don't have the skill. It's just really hard for me to sit down. And I don't even look at the ACAT anymore, honestly, 100%. I just don't.
Yeah.
And I'm bad about that. And that's a bad example. If you're out there and you're prepping for an A part, look at the ACAT, because then that tells you what is on your A part. And a lot of people, especially now, and we'll talk about it, don't even know that like the doctrinal stuff is on there. Like offensive, defensive operations, the .1, they miss that whole section because they're so busy studying systems and EPs. Like, so if you're out there, study the ACAT. That's going to be your guide, and kind of go about that way. Then if you have questions and you go to your IPs, and if you're in the stand shop asking relevant questions in terms of an A part prep, there's an IP right here with me that I'm sure can tell you that's going to make you look good.
Absolutely. And there's something to be said for hanging out in the pilot's lounge, right? And anytime,
I see what you did
see
there.
that? You said I was a good comedian. But yeah, hanging out in the pilot office, and just striking up conversations. You always see somebody who gets real quiet, and that was usually me. And I know I can spot them now because that was always me. And I was like, oh man, they're talking about this thing. And I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And I'm like, crap, man, I need to go get on that. Right. I need to go figure that out, and I start, go home and secretly look it up, and oh God, I'm glad I understand like the transponder modes now. That's probably going to be helpful when I am a pilot command and don't want a flight violation, and just little things like that, that you pick up from other people's experience. So I think as a collective group, and not just the stand shop, but I think as a collective group, if we're striking up conversations when we have time, obviously, which is always a struggle, but if we're striking up those conversations, people are going to get into areas in that conversation where they're not comfortable. And that's good. That's a good thing, right? If you don't know something, that's a good thing 100%. That you figure it out, that you don't know it, because now you know to go figure that out before it kills you.
And if you don't know it, don't be the guy that tries to argue that whatever you're saying is right, because the black and white, the black and white doesn't lie. Like, it is what it is, especially when it's right there. But what's interesting too is the culture, kind of what you were saying, like, those opportunities to be present and to learn from other people and have those study groups, or kind of have what we did, in Europe. That was great for me. And honestly, it recaged me and back into the Lima, because I came in and I'm like, cool, I'm in this company. I don't know anybody, but there's a lot of smart people. Everybody here has been flying Limas. I don't know how much experience people have, but it didn't matter, because I'm listening to these conversations. Granted, a Lima is a Lima, and a Blackhawk is still a Blackhawk. There's very little system differences between the two, outside of avionics stuff, obviously. But that helped me pick up a lot of things. Well, we saw that in the med that I'm at right now, and a big push for us was to create a space for the PIs, and for just pilots to go and be, because that was what we found a lot of times, especially in the med, which we have like 107 people. A lot of PIs and a lot of pilots will like kind of scatter all over the place to their platoon offices. And we said, no, we are going to completely redo our planning room into an actual pilot's room. And that is where people need to be if they're not actively engaged in like an additional duty or a track duty, whatever that might be. Obviously, for track guys, it's a little different. You have your office, you have your job. But I think that's really helped, because, at first it was a little scarce in there, but we've noticed a lot more people kind of moving into there and studying and doing their thing, which for us is great too, because, we can go in there and then we can ask some questions and see where they're at and be like, oh, hey, cool, maybe you guys should talk about this or look this up in the -10. And we put in those little nuggets to build the conversations. So I think if you have a unit, if you are out there and you're in a unit that like you don't have that, make it. Just make your place better and create that environment for people to gather in, because literally that's the whole purpose of this podcast, is sharing knowledge. And the reason we call it the Pilot's Lounge is for this exact reason, to share that knowledge and build it and help you prep. Because as even like Mike was saying, that 8-part prep doesn't start in your 8-part window. It is a continual daily studying task that you build over time. That's the only way that you're going to be successful in being able to be prepared, is just kind of a continual learning phase. Aviation is it's a fickle thing out there, man. Like, the learning doesn't stop, and this shit keeps changing. No,
it doesn't. Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, we're about to get, hopefully some upgrades to our systems here pretty soon. And, I'm going to have to get back in the boat, just because I'm an IP doesn't mean I'm going to have an instant, knowledge of all that stuff. I'm gonna have to get in the -10 and the new -10 and start learning all that stuff, and, another good point is this stuff. If you're better with understanding, your systems, and even things as simple as Aeromed, right? If you're keeping up on this stuff and you understand how it correlates to your actual job and actual flying, well, guess what? There's a flight portion of this eval, right? You're going to go out there and fly, and guess what? You do how many boost off and autos have you done in the past year? Probably not a lot, right?
I've done 2, yeah.
And so that's the thing, right? You go through progression, and then you don't see that IP until you're 8-part, right? Maybe you'll do a mission with them, and if you do, you get out on AMR, you need to say, hey, please brief for IPs. And if we have like 20 minutes on the backside, can we please get in the pattern? Let me do a couple boost offs and an auto, right? Please,
100%.
Help me, IPs are great at it. I do that stuff every day, right? Before I became an IP, I was terrible at boost off. And now it's like, it's not a big deal because I get to do it every day. And that's the only reason I'm good at it, because I do it every single day, right? I get the reps. So try to get after that if you can, get a flight with an IP before your eval, and always ask them to brief for EPs if you get on an AMR. But the other thing is, if you're going in and it's been a little while since you've done these maneuvers, if you understand how your aircraft works, right, and they turn the AFCS off, you can think, okay, well, I was studying this. Okay, the collective goes to mid position when the boost turns off. all right, that might be a problem. If I'm in the downwind, I'm going to start climbing, right? That's probably going to be more collective than I need. So I have to think, right? As soon as I feel that jolt, okay, I need to be ready to push down on that collective, and getting yourself ready, chair flying that a little bit will have you more prepared. And when you're actually in the situation, and then don't like the Navy SEALs do that. They kind of like have their form of chair flying where they go through
So I mean, a
mission in
lot
their
of
head.
those, a lot of those units do. For instance, the best example I can give, and I won't say what specific unit out there does. A lot of units do it. Actually, it's not just them specifically.
Yeah.
They will gather their intel for an objective, whether that's a house, and I don't know how they get it, but like they can get some crazy shit to the exact like blueprints of a structure, and they will build, like they have these movable walls, and they can build the inside of a structure, and they will go through and repeatedly execute how to clear that structure. And they're experts at it. They know the inside of the building like the back of their hand before they ever even are within 100 miles of it. It's wild.
Yeah, they're just building up that muscle memory, right? And that way, when they get there, it's like you're not really thinking much. This is something that I got to take from my previous career and try to apply here. You see these really incredible musicians. They get up on stage and it looks like they're not even trying, and because they're not. Right. They've done what they're doing so many times that they're not really thinking about it anymore. And just like me with a boost off, I get to do it literally every single day. But if it's like this third boost off you've done this year and it's your eval flight, the only way you're going to really prepare for that is by mentally kind of chair flying and understand the systems. If right. We're going to have to do an auto. Okay, cool. Well, I study my aeromed. I know that as soon as that collective goes down, it's going to look like I'm speeding up, but I'm not. So maybe I'll put a little bit of back pressure against the collective and push it slightly forward just to remind myself not to pull it back. Maybe I'll, and if you get ready for 100%. Those things, if you get ready for those things mentally, then when you actually go to execute, it's going to work out a lot better for you, but it all starts from that square one, getting a good first impression, having a good oral eval. By the time you get in the air, if things are going well, you're not going to be as nervous. You're not going to feel as better. You'll be in your own element, and then, all that check ride-itis stuff kind of goes away. And it's just like two guys flying or two gals flying and just, having a good time working on maneuvers, and usually if you, prepare adequately, things are going to be just fine in the flight.
100%. Now you have gone through some good practices in APART prep and showing up prepared and how to go about that. Some examples and techniques. What are some don'ts? And you don't have to go through a bunch. What are some like absolute do not do this on your APART that maybe you've seen, or maybe you've witnessed at Rucker, or maybe you've heard through stories? What are some APART don'ts?
Okay, well, I already mentioned one. Do not show up and not know an underlined step to an emergency procedure. All right, those are non-negotiables. So don't show up to any eval not knowing that stuff. And that's kind of the purpose of no notices, is to make sure people are at least doing that stuff. So you often see 5 and 9s on no notices. Another thing to think about is everybody, I think, inherently knows a little bit about defense mechanisms and how people react to certain stressors. But just so everyone knows, like the instructor pilot course goes into a lot of detail on that. So if you're coming up with any kind of excuses on why you didn't study or why the maneuver didn't go well or whatever, it's like, okay, yeah, that's compensation. That's page 234 out of the fundamentals of instruction. You know what I mean? It's like, that's the first thing we're thinking about. It's like, okay, like they classify
You're not even
everything.
thinking about their excuse. You're like, oh, I remember this from this. That is on paragraph 3-4. That is this mechanism.
Well, especially dealing with these flight school guys, and gals, they, it's like an everyday thing. It's like, oh, well, I didn't know I was supposed to study that. Or I wasn't very good. I could, I don't know why I didn't pull enough, I don't know though. But the point is, don't make excuses for anything. If something didn't go well, you're like, yeah, just take the criticism and okay, cool. Yeah. I'll try to do that better next time. I'll try to, I'll add less aft cyclic or whatever it is, like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
You're not going to get into an argument with an IP. You're not going to win an argument with an IP. It's just not going to happen. Right. Even if, let's face the facts, even if the IP is wrong, you're not going to win that fight. You're going to maybe later you talk to somebody and be like, hey dude, he's maybe that's one thing, but like during the eval, you're not in command, right? You are not the pilot in command. It's just how it is. Right. And how it has to be for an evaluation to happen. It's just the way of things. So take your licks and, hopefully you get a good debrief. And in that debrief, even if you're, I've given some check rides where the oral didn't go so well and the flight didn't go so well, but I could tell an urgency and a need that, that student wanted to get better. And they're like, yeah, I'm really struggling with those roll-ons or whatever. And I'm trying to get them better. I know I was like right on the border of the standard there, I'm like, yeah, that's okay. If you're trying to get better and you at least meet the standard, or at times, if you maybe broke the standard, maybe we can do a little retraining and we try again, and people are going to be more lenient on you if you have a positive attitude and you're not trying to make excuses, and you show a genuine, desire to get better and to do this job better, because we can't really afford anything else. And people like especially those older guys you were talking about, they went through some stuff, and that like, a lot of that hard IP kind of persona, I think, comes from that. It's like maybe we think they're jerks, but at the end of the day, like they've seen some stuff and they've seen people get killed, and it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna let you get away with that,
Yeah, 100%. This is totally an aside. It's an interesting story I heard last night when we came back in from our flight, and our first sergeant, who has been in the Army for quite some time, and he early in his career got to serve with some guys who came back on active duty who served in Vietnam, just to kind of give a breadth of how long this guy's kind of been around off and on. Yeah, it's it's wild. But he was talking about how this Vietnam pilot who then went over to work in Swoop Land, and that's where they worked together, but was talking about how in Vietnam they had a confined area bird where they would take at what was the time the battle damage book, which basically they had to be able to say, okay, this is what's happened to the aircraft. We're still good to fly it. Cool. We're going to go back out and fly it. Well, they took the battle damage book and created this Huey that was their confined area birds, where they chopped 3 feet off of all of the blades, because that's what they were allowed to lose off of the blades before it was no-go. So they just started chopping
That's
shit
insane.
off this Huey to be able to get it into smaller, more confined areas. I was like, what? Like, what on earth? But granted, they also chopped down bamboo trees with Hueys then too. But no, he was just going through that. You're talking about nuts, like these guys seeing some shit and doing some shit, but like, understand, not much different than that. The last people who, to kind of give some of our listeners an idea about specifically the generation we're talking about, it's the late, at this point now, it's the late 90s, early 2000s guys that are the old guys, and these guys are the last true guys who really went and last flew in what we would consider the closest thing to a near peer environment that's existed for Army aviation. They're flying, or for conventional Army aviation, they flew into the invasion of Iraq with missile systems and everything else popping off. And there was a lot of shit, so, but they came from a time when none of them had much experience at that time, or a whole lot of experience, and they couldn't afford anything less than like 100%. I think that that's the most important part of, kind of where standards come in, and why the A part's important, and why like knowing this shit is all important, because when you go to that environment, like you can't, like, all the other stuff just has to be second nature. Like it's cool. It's a known, got it. Yeah. But the focus is this. Understanding all of that other stuff just feeds into that idea that like, hey, this is a no-fail mission, and there's too much other shit going on to where, like, for you to not know the basic stuff that can be a byproduct of what we do.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I got a very small taste of that when I went to Afghanistan, because I was the guy that I was basically like the ball and chain, whoever had to fly with me, because they were already in theater for 4 months, and they had a system set up. They had a flow, and it was like, oh God, like this kid doesn't even know like how to turn the APR 39 on. Like he'd never done. Yeah, hey, Mike, come on. But yeah, and it's like, oh great, it was a huge mountain to climb to get up R01 and then start going to fly missions with those guys. Just a little bit that I got to do, but they were not messing around, and it's like it was baptism by fire. And fortunately I didn't get into any kind of weird conflict or anything like that while I was there. Fortunately, but I mean, it was all around, and you could see it in everybody's face. It's like, you got dudes hanging guns out the back, ready to pop off rounds at any given time, and I'm still here trying to, figure out how the GPS works, and how
do I go over the mountain or do I go around the mountain? He's laughing because I know his story.
Fortunately, I remember how TGT limiting works just in the nick of time, so that was good. But yeah, so I just got a small little taste of, I guess working with people who are, who have expertise in that environment, but certainly like you're saying, like, and now working with some of the older, contractor guys who are retired, and they were in that stuff, in the beginning of Iraq and all that. And I mean, they, their stories are crazy, and they're funny with the students. I mean, they, we all had a DAC or two in flight school.
Oh yeah.
They're ruthless, it's great to see.
Yeah. They almost remind me of like a tenured professor who just is like, I can say whatever I want and nobody's going to fire me.
Nope. They're not, because we need them.
Yep. Kind of talking a little bit about Rucker. What are the big things for our listeners coming from somebody who lives there and gets to pass through those pearly gates every day on the way to work? What are the big rumors coming out of Rucker for things that are potentially going to affect everyone out there?
Well, first of all, Enterprise is the city of progress. All right. We have 2 water towers now. All right. Remember where the water tower was? We've got a second one now. So for Fort Rucker, nothing really big. I mean, we're changing it to Fort Novacell. I believe that's official, is the last word I heard. It's going to be coming in couple months, but renaming to Fort Novacell. So we have no idea what Mother Ruckers is going to be called. I think that's on the tip of everybody's mind. That's going to be the first thing we got to sort out.
It's so iconic too. That's just crazy.
So maybe I don't know. Maybe it'll keep the name. I don't know. But right now, I mean, we're I guess the whole Army is hurting for personnel, but we're hurting for personnel. They're trying to push as many people through as possible. So we're definitely staying really busy, flying every day. Like there's really not a day when we don't fly, which is awesome because I love it. I mean, I love flying. So, the days are long, but at least I get to fly every day instead of doing ALSI every day, which was my former job, which I absolutely hated. But, I think that's really the biggest thing, just pushing people through. I know they're still working on potentially moving to that tactics instructor, but when I went through, they were starting to give out some newer classes, and they're starting to make the transition, but I think it's like a longer term thing, and I think they're still trying to figure out how it's all going to work. So
are they still talking any of the future vertical lift things? I feel like that's just program that's just been there for so long, but like I don't like, what is actually, have they talked any about what's going to happen with that?
I've not heard much about future vertical lift. I did get to go TDY and test the Victor route, which was super cool.
Yep. Nice.
So the Victor's going to be pretty awesome for any units who are getting that. It's got a lot of bells and whistles that even the Mike doesn't have, but we might be getting a lot of the similar stuff in the software upgrade. But the Victor's pretty awesome. I think it's going to be a really solid aircraft for those getting that upgrade.
I think it's going to be mostly guard and reserve. So that'd be pretty cool.
It's definitely a solid aircraft. It's definitely going to be awesome. And as it stands right now, I think it's kind of better than the mic, except it's just not coupleable. But besides that, it's got a lot of cool features. But yeah, once the mic gets that software upgrade, man, we're gonna be.
Which is funny because we have been saying that for like 10 years now. When the software upgrade's coming out next year.
Yeah, well, they're real adamant about it really happening like really soon. So we'll see. You know, we're all waiting with. They keep talking about they just need to squirt it in. That's like it's like a software update that they just need to squirt it in, you know, to the system, and then it's good to go. That's the phraseology.
I don't know if that's how software works.
That's you know, they're bringing on a little data stick, or I don't know how it's going to work, but they just stick it right in there.
Squirting data stick. I heard it here first, folks.
That's the phraseology that's been going around. So
that's what's coming out of Fort Rucker is squirting data sticks for the software upgrades. But no, that is good. I hope they do get it soon. Again, I feel like we're so numb to it. I feel like a lot of us who've been around for some time now are like, oh yeah, the FMS, the software upgrade is coming. Yeah. This upgrade's coming. This upgrade's coming, just because they keep saying it. But at the same hand too, like this stuff takes so long. Like especially on, you know, the ASC, and I'm not going to dive down that road, but like when you're looking at stuff, they're looking like 7 years from now.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, okay, they could have signed it in 2010, but God knows whatever contract had to run out for them to get to it.
Right.
Now. So it's just kind of wild, you know, but nonetheless, that's awesome, man. And Mike, I don't want to take too much more of your time here. Sure. But you know, I do appreciate you taking the time out of your evening. I know you have to be up early in the morning to go back out and try not to get killed by flight school students at Fort Rucker, but I know you probably won't because you've taught them well. But something that we do ask every guest that cross your fingers, right? Something that we do ask everybody that we have on the show is if you had one piece of advice for someone wanting to come into aviation or who's just starting out into aviation, you know, whether that's to be happy or to be successful, what would that piece of advice be?
Good question. I would say to do this job well and to succeed at it, you really have to make sure you have a passion for it. And it's not hard, in my opinion, to have a passion because this job is awesome. But you know, there's definitely a lot of hardships along the way that you don't anticipate, a lot of hidden costs, so to speak, that, you know, you're not ready for. But I think at the end of the day, it's been worth it for me. And, but I just love doing it. I just love my job, and I just love trying to get better at it. And I think that's helped me to, you know, succeed as far as I have in the Army. But, you know, I know some people who have kind of like lost their passion for it, and it's like, man, this is not really the job where you want to lose your passion for what you're doing. And that, you know, I kind of don't want to fly with you anymore. Like, you know, it gets a little worrisome. No, 100%. So if you're considering this career path, make sure it's what you want to do. But at the same time, if it really gets you excited, I don't think it's going to be too hard for you to, you know, maintain that passion. You know, it's not too many people I've seen in that ballpark, but I have seen some people, and it's kind of depressing, you know, and a little bit scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's one of those jobs, to your point, and that's a great piece of advice. It's one of those jobs where if you're not 100% in, and I feel like it's one of those ones where you know pretty quick whether you are or you're not. If you're not 100% in, it's not like it doesn't ignite a fire in you, then just don't do it, because if it doesn't do it at the beginning, it's never going to do it.
Yeah.
You know? So, and I would say of all the things related to this job, flying is the one saving grace. But no, Mike, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. And I know our listeners are going to appreciate it as well. We wanted to change it up and bring some different subject areas. One kind of more specifically to Army aviation. We usually talk in a very broad spectrum, sharing stories and this and that. But I was like, man, I really want to let's talk about a very specific topic, because most of our listeners do have an Army aviation background or are interested, or maybe they're just out there trying to pass the same thing still applies for a civilian check, right? You know, tackle it the same way. So, but nonetheless, man, again, thank you for coming on, and we hope to have you back on when everybody's back.
Nice. Thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun, man. You guys' show is awesome. I was listening to your things I wish I'd known before I bought an aircraft hold short recently, and it was really awesome. So it's an honor to be on.
that was an interesting one. And before we go, because I know we did not talk about it at all, and I'm not going to talk about it on here because I don't want to ruin it for your YouTube channel, because this will also be on YouTube, and I don't want people to cheat and not do their due diligence to like and subscribe to your channel, which again, if you are listening this and you want to see some cool flight instruction on Microsoft Flight Simulator, head over to YouTube, search Snak Pak, but that is SNAK space PAK, Snak Pak, to go find Mike's videos. Great content. Like and subscribe to that. And we'll put a link in our YouTube video over to his channel so that you can check out his content on there. But Mike has the nickname and uses that as his YouTube call sign, we'll say, off of a really cool story that happened while he was deployed, but we are not going to talk about it here because I don't want to ruin that.
I got to get to 1,000 subscribers. I'm at about 200 right now. We're just starting out, but when I get to 1,000, I'll let the cat out of the bag.
And it's 100% hilarious. I will say it's one of the more funny, it's one of the more funny stories I think I've ever heard of how somebody got a call sign. And anybody who's been deployed or been a new warrant officer to a unit will 100% appreciate what that whole story entails. So again, go like and subscribe to his channel. Also check out Brotalion. You'll be able to find his channel through ours, or just Google till you find it. It'll be on there. Again, thanks, Mike, and I hope you have a great night, man.
Thanks so much, Nick. You have a good one. Pleasure being here.